And I think there's something in the Torah that really helps us understand the situation. There's the story of Ishmael and Yitzchak, right? So Abraham is the great Abraham, the leader of his tribe, and Abraham needs to have a son. And Sarah, his wife, is not having children, so they take on Hagar, and Ishmael is born. Now, Ishmael being raised is the prodigy. He's the next one in line. He's the prince. You're going to be the one who's going to take over Avram's role. And out of nowhere, a miracle happens, and Sarah gives birth. And all of a sudden, Ishmael is on the side. All the attention goes on to Yitzchak, and obviously that developed a form of jealousy for Ishmael. And then Ishmael starts to be a bad influence onto Yitzchak. Sarah catches up to this and says, I'm not having it. He's got to go. And so all of a sudden, Ishmael and Hagar, his mother, gets kicked out to the wilderness. Now imagine what that does to a child, right? I was the next one in line, honorable, you're the future. And all of a sudden, I'm in the wilderness with no water and food in the desert. Go from one extreme to the next. Now, a child that's a teenager might not be as mature to understanding the situation. Ishmael looks at it as the source of all my problems. What changed me from a good life to a bad life is Yitzchak being born. So Yitzchak is the one who stole everything from me, and that developed hatred and rage, and he became spiteful and swearing that he would one day kill his brother. And what we see with the parallels is Yitzchak is born, Ishmael is kicked out. But Yitzchak didn't want Ishmael to be kicked out. He was just born. It wasn't his choice. Israel is born. Palestinians get kicked out. Now, it wasn't Israel's choice or intention to have Palestinians kicked out, but as a nature of everything that happened overall, all of a sudden this injustice happens. Now, how eventually does Ishmael and Yitzchak fix their relationship? Well, Yitzchak, after Sarah dies, he sees his father mourning the loss of Sarah and realizing he needs someone to be there with him. He needs someone by his side. And Ishmael, although his mother had just died and she didn't really like Hagar, and right when your mother dies, you're going to make this suggestion, he goes to his father and says, you need to bring Hagar back. And Hagar comes back, does tshuva, comes back with a different name. But when Ishmael sees this and say, wait a minute, the person that I thought created all of my pain and struggle is now the one correcting it. The person that I thought took away my honor is now the one bringing it back. I must not really know who my brother is. And now that he's more mature, he realizes, wait a minute, he was just a baby when I was kicked out. It wasn't really ever his choice. And because Yitzchak was responsible for fixing the problems that Ishmael was facing, although he didn't cause them, that freed Ishmael from his mindset, from the prison within his mind. And eventually Ishmael is able to do tshuva. And when Avram dies, they unite together and are pushing forward to fulfill the role. So I think when we look at the situation, we didn't create the problems of the Palestinians, but we do have the power to be able to solve them.
Are we going to be tested on it, by the way? I just want to make sure that was
that's
amazing.
beautiful, yeah, because Israel was a baby when it happened, but and they're being treated as if they were a 75-year-old nation in 1948 with all the power and resources they have now, and made a decision to expel the Arabs.
Right.
But they weren't. They were a fledgling country. They didn't even know if they were going to exist in another few months. But now that they do have the power, they have to change the way they think about themselves.
Yeah, we talk about tikkun olam and or lagoim to heal the world and empower all nations. Well, how about we do tikkun babayit im bnei dodim? Why don't we heal our own home with our own cousins before we even imagine that we need to do the world? So I think Israel needs to play more of a role, active role of changing the scenario. Even though we're not blamed for its creation, we are responsible for its solution.
Interesting. Here's the fundamental question, because here's where I think the debate is, and you have a unique perspective on this. Is the conflict fundamentally ideological or geopolitical? In other words, you just gave this story which outlines to me an ideological, from its roots, biblical conflict that has its roots in ideology. But you've also spoken about how it's actually a product of white settler British colonialism that has pitted Arabs against Jews to create this instability. So if you could talk about that take on it and how that squares with what you just outlined, which to me, I more agree with that. I think a lot of the hostility, at least towards the Jews, towards Israel in the Arab and Muslim world and the Palestinian world, is an ideological one. The idea of Yahud, the idea of this prosperous Jewish state in the middle of what should be a Muslim land, is the offense. That is why they want to, I feel like when the terrorist on October 7th called his parents, he didn't say, Mom, Dad, I just stopped the British colonialist extension. Mom, Dad, I just got our house back. He said, Mom, I killed 10 Jews. It feels rooted in a very deep spiritual resistance towards Jews.
Right. So I think what Hamas is the extreme version of Ishmael pre the tikkun of Yitzchak that is able for him to heal and do tshuva. And so what we look in Ishmael, the way he's described his relationship towards Yitzchak is he blames Yitzchak for all of his problems, right? Hamas blames Israel for all their problems, and he hates him and wants to kill him and thinks the only way for him to go back to what it was is by killing him, which is exactly the Hamas ideology. And I think it's actually a big mistake to equate Hamas to Amalek, because although Hamas is the enemy we're experiencing now, so because we're experiencing and we know there's this word called Amalek that is like the enemy of enemies, we've had many enemies throughout time. Right, Egyptians, Babylonians, Assyrians, Moabites, Romans, Greeks, enemies that were horrible.
Philistines.
They were not all Amalek, right? Amalek, right? Amalek is
Not connected, by the way. Don't make a mistake.
well. There is a storyline that's connected. Look,
Rudy's got new takes on everything,
the,
so
the,
maybe.
the Torah is what gives us these micro examples of what macro reality we're experiencing, right? It's giving us stories that we can understand that then repeats in our lifetime that we can process and understand how to overcome. But the point is that Amalek is a nation that hates us not for who we're not, but for who we are. Amalek looks at the Jewish people and says, the Jewish people are brought here to bring spirituality to this world, and we're here to fight them against it. One of the characteristics that talks about how you can recognize Amalek is Amalek will be against circumcision, your brit that you have with Hashem. And what we look with Hitler was against circumcision. Hitler said in his book that the Jews were brought to bring consciousness to the world, and I was brought to remove it. Hitler found out where potentially the Bnei Moshe were and sent out Nazis to go and kill them. That's Amalek.
Do they worship Molech? Is that like the connection, Amalek and Molech, or is that completely different?
That I'm not
just
familiar
made
with.
that
I don't
You know,
know.
like the
think
one
they-
of gods that was given human sacrifices to, Molech. Is that Amalek related?
I'm not sure.
All right,
not
don't
sure
mean to
either.
dodge it. Don't mean to whatever. So anyway,
But-
that Hitler's more in line with Amalek, you're saying?
Well, Hitler is Amalek.
Yeah.
It's like there are many nations who hate us,
Definitively.
but usually they hate us for who we're not. Like we're being blamed for the economic situation in Europe leading to the Holocaust. We're being blamed for COVID. We're being blamed for the Black Plague. And we know we didn't do this. So usually nations that hate us for who we're not is not an expression of Amalek. Amalek hates us for who we are. And if we look at Hamas, Hamas is not against us bringing spirituality to the world, us being connected to Hashem, us keeping kosher, us doing spirituality. So it's not really Amalek. It's the extreme version of Ishmael. And there is a way to end it. Now, I don't think that this is like a storyline that continues. I think it's a storyline that kind of repeats itself. And so obviously Ishmael is not literally today the Palestinians, but that storyline allows us to understand how to deal with it. And I do think that it's, you mentioned geopolitical. I think that the British are the ones who instilled this idea in our minds that we needed to be against one another. Now, if you look at what the British did after